Welcome to the Yankee Cowboy Podcast, coming to you from Dallas, Texas. Here's your host, Tim Wilkins.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Yankee Cowboy Podcast. I'm joined by the co-host of co-hosts again, Chris, joining me once again. And today's topic, very important topic. Well, things can be bad, things can be good. We'll just penalize everybody because NASCAR has no idea how to run a porta-john. That's right. We're talking about all the penalties that NASCAR has levied in the last, let's say, 2.5 weeks. And how much that hypocrisy has actually changed and negatively affected the sport of NASCAR. So, Chris, I don't know about you, man, but to kick this off, and this is where full disclosure is happening here, Hendrick got penalized with pretty much the largest fine in the sports history. Denny Hamlin opened up his big-ass mouth and got himself a penalty, but then he decided to somehow, I don't even know how that's even possible, but to, appeal the penalty. And then this past week at Atlanta, Josh Williams gets penalized for a whole race because of parking the car right next to the flag stand. By the way, Josh Williams gained himself some fans with the parking the car next to the flag stand thing. Good move. Hell of a mullet. And, Chris, I think as sports fans, we have a huge service to the industry as a whole, but at some point, enough's enough of this hypocrisy. So I'm going to lay the table on the floor here. I'm going to lay the food on the table here. And as our good friend and our good, awesome, conservative, and great man by the name of Mark Levin, Chris is going to have it, and we're going to fully discuss this. But first, foremost, I think Chris needs to go full ham. Shall we? Floor is yours, sir.
Well, Tim, obviously good to be back this week. Was not here last week, but I think we want to go with each of the three individual topics. So I think we'll start with the Hendrick penalty first, and just to give people a little bit of background who may be listening. Hendrick Motorsports, following the Phoenix race, was all four of their crew chiefs were fined, I believe, $100,000. Each driver lost 100 points. They also lost all their playoff points that they had accumulated, and the crew chiefs were suspended for 4 weeks and now a lot of people have heard this term, the louvers that are on the hood that basically direct the air inside the evacuate air from inside the area where the engine is out. So. From what I had read and heard, Hendrick allegedly had manipulated those louvers to where they had one louver cut off with air, and it was basically almost doing kind of basically keeping that air pent up inside the car. Now again, don't know if that's 100% true. That's kind of the rumors that I've been reading on the internet. But don't again. That there is everyone here is innocent until proven guilty. The big reason why obviously this is a huge deal is because NASCAR with this next gen car, these are what they call single source parts. So basically, teams for years were their own manufacturers. They built these cars from the ground up, but now with this next gen car, everything is sourced out, and then it's basically just a kit car that you're putting together. The folks at Hendrick, Jeff Gordon and Chad Gunnis, have said there are issues with quality control with these parts, that they're in the process of churning these parts out so fast to try and keep up with the demand that these teams have to keep the cars on the racetrack, and especially during the West Coast swing, that these parts did not properly fit the car. So thusly, they are appealing this penalty. No timetable set on when that appeal will be heard. I would say as of taping this, I'd say within the next within the next week or so, there probably will be an appeals hearing, which is almost like an independent court of stakeholders in NASCAR or in the industry that will hear that appeal, and then from there, the appeal is either upheld or rescinded or is modified. So time to tell, in terms of what Hendrick has now. Playing devil's advocate, obviously, looking at it from one side, NASCAR had to do something. There's always been a little level of what people believe is favoritism towards Hendrick Motorsports. So NASCAR really had to come down hard on them. The opposite side of that would be obviously these single source parts and the fact they're churning off so fast, and there is no quality. There is a lack of quality control that they've seen in terms of each part being replicated exactly. That could be an area where they could have something. And then also the fact that this was done pre-practice, because they did a practice session there in Phoenix because of the new aero package that NASCAR rolled out for the short tracks and road courses. So they've got a few things that potentially they could stand on that could at least maybe see them get the penalties. I don't believe they'll be fully rescinded, but I believe that they could potentially be relegated down. Again, only time is going to tell as it kind of relates to the penalties itself. Me personally, I think obviously when teams are told with this car that you cannot manipulate any of the single source parts, this is a huge thing. Last year, Roush Fenwick Kozlowski Racing was given a large penalty for what was believed to be a manipulation of a part of the race car itself, which NASCAR did not disclose, but they had appealed it and said it was a safety issue, and the appeal was shot down, and the penalties were upheld. So, and then we should also mention too, besides Hendrick, the 31 car from Colleague Racing, Justin Haley, also received a penalty, and in fact, he is in the negative points right now. He's like negative 40 points. William Byron, had won 2 of the last 3 races, he's actually at negative playoff points. All the Hendrick drivers now outside the top 20 points to show how big of a drop it was.
So my thing is exactly how is this going to affect? So NASCAR at some point, why is Hendrick the one that's getting sought after? Because it seems like to me that at some point, NASCAR has made rules for thee, but not for them for a long time on Hendrick. And I'm not saying this to be crazy, but Chad Knaus, Jeff Gordon, a lot of Ray Everham back in the day. These guys got away with a lot of parts and modification. So,
yeah, and I think you got to look at it from perspective also too. I mean, you look at what Hendrick is doing right now. You figure, they have the Garage 56 program, which is going to be running 24 Hours of Le Mans in June. That program there is solely run by Hendrick Motorsports, and it's using a next-gen car. And obviously, the NASCAR's testing van, they have. I mean, while this car may be completely different in terms of the platform of the car itself, I mean, when it comes down to it, it's still a next-gen race car, and it can still take. There's no way you can not say you're not learning something with running that car. They also have a program too where they also take old cup cars and sell them basically to rich people. It's called their Track Attack program. So that's another area that potentially Hendrick can look at manipulating in terms of their on-track, where they could do on-track stuff to relegate, to go around NASCAR's testing. So there's always things you look at, in terms of levels of favoritism that, and maybe it's a little bit of conspiracy theory, but when you look at things like that and you say, well, Hendrick's leash seems to be a lot longer than the RFKs or the Penske's or the Joe Gibbs Racing of the world. As you recall, last year, Denny Hamlin got DQ'd in Pocono for a piece of tape under their for a piece of tape on the nose of their car, which you're not allowed to tape the noses like you used to be on the old car. So when it comes down to it, the sometimes it feels like the crime doesn't fit, the punishment doesn't fit the crime when it comes to certain situations.
What I'm mainly getting at, and I mean this respectfully to Hendrick Motorsports, they're obviously a great team. But at some point, Chris, it comes a time where NASCAR seems to kind of not make an even-keeled decision when it comes to this. Obviously, on the single-source parts, we've seen that in the past. We got to have a penalty. But why this much? Okay, why the penalties of this nature and this magnitude? And at some point, people are going to have to call, as they call it, a spade here, and say they don't know how to manage a porta potty, let alone this organization, because $100,000 a crew chief, which, by the way, not all crew chiefs make that kind of money. Some of them do, some don't.
I believe typically those are normally paid by the team, so I don't see. Well, I don't see Rick Hendrick trying to extort money out of his crew chief for a penalty.
Okay, and that's defined. But how about the points? If each driver, which, by the way, it's been a Hendrick show on the West Coast, we're not going to, we can talk about Atlanta a little bit, but Atlanta, in my opinion, has been ruined by the repave, so I can't even watch that race anymore.
No doubt the points are massive. That's where if you're going to fight it. That's
so like a guy like William Byron, based on the old rules, based on the old rule book, he won, so technically he's in with 16 drivers. However, he won at the beginning of the season, so technically he's not fully in yet, because you can have 16 different winners or more than 16 different winners. So, yeah. And that's where that goes. But at the same point, very valid here, is he has an entire season to make that up. So at some point, the same thing goes with, Alex Bowman, Kyle Larson, and, obviously with Josh Berry, which, they got their own little issues there with the exemption they're going to have to file for Chase Elliott for a snowboarding incident. But I just think NASCAR has ruined the sport and what we like to watch, because seriously, ever since I'll talk about this. Ever since they went back to change the point structure and the point standings, NASCAR has not been the same ever since. And obviously they've been catering to a TV rights deal that's obviously elongated. But at the same point, it's not getting better for the sport. They've changed the schedule. The ratings haven't changed. Sorry. Atlanta is not a fun track to watch anymore. Phoenix, okay, great.
There's never really been an exciting race in Phoenix.
It's pretty boring. Other than the last time that Jeff Gordon was in a race, and that's actually a competitive race for the championship. For me anyway. But California, they're redoing that track, making it basically a little more than a half a mile, and it's gonna be 0.66 miles, 0.67 miles. And then you have obviously Daytona, which people just enjoy watching cars get destroyed. So Tony Stewart said it best, man. Really did. But so that being said, to me, Chris, I don't see how NASCAR can get themselves out of this ditch that they're in of being hypocritical. What are you going to do now? You're going to a small parts violation, you're going to fucking wipe out a small team for the entire year. It seems like there's some hypocrisy that they need to get their ducks in a row.
Yeah. And I think we'll obviously see what happens. Whenever this appeal is heard, it should be pretty fast from the time that the appeal is heard to when final ruling is made. But obviously the big thing for them, and one thing we should also add to the record as well, is Hendrick Motorsports is appealing the penalty, but they are not the crew chiefs, because it normally in an appeal the crew chiefs would be allowed to remain active at the racetrack, but they've opted to the crew chiefs will serve the time away in terms of a strategic move for them, because they feel like obviously the sooner they can get them back, the better. But but obviously they're trying to get those points back. That's the big sign.
Yeah, and I mean I can understand why they want the points back. Obviously, it puts them in better contention for the playoffs, and obviously that makes a lot of sense. So moving forward, though, in the next, I would say, sequence of stupidity events is the Denny Hamlin suspension, or not suspension, but penalty, which honestly, the man inserted his own foot in his mouth in the nicest way possible by discussing the on-track incident, which, by the way, for everyone keeping track at home, this is for an on-track incident that happened between him and Ross Chastain. Ross Chastain got basically, as I would like to say, he ran out of racetrack by Denny Hamlin. And as much as you want to say it, or no one else wants to say it, it's a wrecking situation because he ran out of racetrack. But NASCAR doesn't deem it as such a way until this penalty came out. The reason why NASCAR views it as such is because Denny Hamlin went on his podcast, which okay, we have a podcast here. I'm not going to incriminate myself on my own podcast. But apparently, Denny Hamlin doesn't own a PR firm, or let alone his own conscience, to understand that's not a good idea to talk about it. Or he just doesn't care. I'm going to go with the latter. I'm going to go with the other one.
The show is perfectly named Actions Detrimental. One of the best names for a podcast. It fits it perfectly.
Well, yeah, he does it quite well to himself. I mean, I get it. I understand why he named it that, because he's really is he is actions detrimental to the organization. But I don't understand how. Okay, this is where NASCAR. So what happens if a guy goes on let's say a guy goes on, Chris goes on Dale Jr. Download and talks about something 10 years later about nearly wrecking a guy on purpose. What are they gonna do? Suspend him? You know what I mean? Like it's to the point now where, like, listen, Denny Hamlin and Ross Chastain are basically like Cole Trickle and Rowdy Burns in the sense of analogies with the rental car scene. They just can't seem to not find each other, you know?
Yeah, they find each other on the racetrack every week. This will be my scorched earth part of the podcast, and maybe a little bit of the Josh Williams conversation. So my biggest thing as it relates to this conversation, obviously, I think Denny thought the statute of limitations had run out, and he would not be gone back and be penalized. But when it comes down to it, we look at it from this perspective, NASCAR as a whole now is looking for personality. They need drivers who can resonate with a fan base and get people excited to watch the sport. When it comes down to it, we don't need 40 Austin Cindrics or you name the driver. We don't need 40 of the same drivers who don't really, are very cut and dry and stick to their talking points. We need drivers who are willing to buck the system, or willing to say what people may want to hear, that could be held against them in the court of law of NASCAR. So when it comes down to it, ultimately, Denny, yes, I mean, from a safety perspective, as a driver saying, "Oh yeah, I let go of the wheel and just ran a guy in the fence," especially knowing the rather shaky track record of this car, was it smart? No, absolutely not. When it comes down to it, we have a driver who is willing to it and still is in the prime of his career, and it has, and is going to be a Hall of Famer whether he wins a championship or not. Ultimately, out here saying what is truly on his mind and how he feels about the sport itself, and giving fans an opportunity to know more about the sport. And I'd tell anyone on here, rising tide lifts all ships. I'd certainly tell people, if you get a chance to listen to his podcast, it's a good listen. He does a phenomenal job. Him as a top level driver, a team owner, a veteran of the sport, he does a great job explaining what it is like to be a NASCAR driver. But we cannot allow these drivers. We cannot say to these drivers, on one hand, "Hey, we want you guys to showcase your personality for our fans," and then the minute they showcase their personality, they're fined for it. that's a slippery slope. I look at it from the perspective of this almost has the vibes of 2004 with Dale Earnhardt Jr. When Dale Earnhardt Jr. is in victory lane, he wins at Talladega. He's a surefire contender to win the first. Then it was the chase for the Nextel Cup. He says shit in victory lane and is fined 25 points. And that basically cost him a chance at the championship. So when you look at it from this perspective, we're kind of going down a path of no return, because we want these drivers to showcase their personality. But if the sport is going to continue to suspend these guys for doing that, well, we're going to have issues, because drivers aren't going to be willing to be out there and to showcase their their personality itself. They're already at it. They're already at a disadvantage, because obviously, these drivers are covered in logos. The way that keeps them on the racetrack is corporate sponsorship. The minute that a driver screws up royally and corporate sponsorship is taken away or goes away or they're canceled, see you later. You're not driving anymore. So it's certainly one of those things that frustrates me, because me as an enthusiast of the sport, I enjoy when drivers showcase their personality. But if drivers are going to continually be penalized for showcasing that personality to buck the system of the league, of the sanctioning body, then, well, it's not going to be good. I'm done now.
All right. Thank you, Mark Levin of NASCAR. I appreciate it, Chris. Thank you very much. The last one we got to talk about, man, honestly, is the one that most recently happened that honestly piqued my interest the most. And not in a way that you would think it would pique my interest. A grown man had a mullet. That probably the first way he caught me. Secondly, the man obviously got into a wreck, had a good old sizable beer bond, bond tape on his car. Drove around about, I would say, what do you think, Chris? About 20 or so laps before it caused a caution. Roughly.
Yeah,
something like that.
So I did not see a lot of that race, to be honest with you.
Oh yeah, it's the Xfinity race, so it's a Saturday, so people have things to do.
And I knew we all knew it was gonna be a shit show with this package.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, the only guys that still lift at Atlanta.
And just to give everyone a little quick background about what happened. So, the race was a disaster. The first stage took, I've heard it took upwards of an hour and a half, which is crazy for an Xfinity race.
What was it like for 35 lap? Was it how many total laps was it? 150 or something?
250 mile race. So I'm not sure the exact number of laps.
So they probably did 50, 50, and then 150, right?
Give or take. Yeah. But the first stage took abhorrently long, and NASCAR, and listen, when it comes down to it, the television's huge. That NASCAR was saying, all right, we're going to be way over our TV window. And Josh was caught up in a wreck and had come down pit road, and the team had put what they call bear bond on the body of the car. So that bear bond is basically like a 3 foot by 3 foot piece of tape that you can put and cover up holes and various things to hold body panels on. Well, it was, from what I heard, it was freezing in Atlanta, and that bear bond doesn't react well to the cold. So normally they'll have to take a heat gun or some type of, or a torch or something, and they'll have to heat that bear bond up. Well, the bear bond did not stick onto the car, and Josh went back on the racetrack, and the bear bond flew off, and NASCAR had to, this was under caution. NASCAR had to continue with it, keep the race under caution. So Josh was told, okay, you're done. You got to go to the garage. And it is in the rule book that it is at NASCAR's discretion. So Josh, being told that he was done for the day, opted to stop his car at the start finish line, climb out, and then walk across the grass and wave to the fans.
Now, technically, Chris, that's not against the rule book to do that, right? To park your car at the start finish line. That's kind of
no. It gets a point across, no doubt about it. So,
well, that was my point. Yeah. Was I don't think he broke any rules in that regard where he deserves a 1 race penalty because he parked his vehicle next to the start finish line in protest, basically, of being told, "Hey, you're done for the day because you caused a caution." Now, yes, it is technically in the rule book, but he did not violate the damaged vehicle policy. The repairs that were made is a simple beer bond. He could have just held him for a couple laps. I don't see how it got to that escalation where they had to park him. I would say they probably should have made sure that repair was firmly on the car, which, that's where I understand a penalty of like 3 to 5 laps.
Yeah,
would
2
make
to
sense.
yeah.
I understand that would make sense. But what really frustrates me as a fan is that he gets held and he gets stuck as a driver enthusiast and a person that understands the sport. The driver's done for the day for a wrecked vehicle incident. He doesn't want to be hanging out in NASCAR's hall or waiting for NASCAR to come on down and basically call him out to the principal's office. That's what he had to do. He had to wait for the race to be over, which was about another hour and a half. And then NASCAR came down from the control booth and then started basically, giving him the reprimand from the principal's office. It doesn't, to me, there was no conversation that was going to need to be had that couldn't have been had in about 10 to 15 minutes. So to me, it's stupid.
And a lot of that's done out of spite. Like, hey, you did that to us. Now we're going to make your day a living hell. And I think the reason why people are frustrated and why Josh is frustrated is because you look at the totality of situations like this. Josh Williams is what you would call a journeyman driver. He's not in top level equipment. He's basically scratching and clawing to make a name, using the phrase of the Xfinity series, to make a name in the series himself on a shoestring budget, and however the way they finish every week is basically how they get to the racetrack. He doesn't have big name sponsors. Also, another thing you look at from the perspective of, we can even go back to bring Hendrick into this. Back in 2021 at the Roval, Chase Elliott had gotten a wreck with Kevin Harvick. It was retaliation from Kevin from a wreck that happened at Bristol. And Chase Elliott was driving around with a bumper cover that was flapping in the breeze for about 10 laps before it came off and caused a caution that, by all intents and purposes, helped him. So the fact you're going to penalize a guy for a piece of bear bond flying off, but then you allow the sport's most popular driver 10 laps to allow his bumper cover to fly off to get a caution, proves why it's rather
and that's where that's what I'm saying. Like, I mean, okay, we can look through the other penalties here. The Bubba Wallace self spins over the years. I mean, not just one, but like multiple times throughout the year.
Dale Jr. spun out one time.
Intentionally,
intentionally spun out one time. It's happened.
He calls it. Dale Jr. even has a name for it on his podcast. He talks about going to get a pizza. Like, he talks about it. So it in all seriousness, dude, like, Josh Williams on a shoestring budget, you're going to penalize the guy for a race. So he can't run. I'm assuming they're at Circuit of Americas this week. Is that correct?
Yep.
So maybe he wasn't going to run there this week, but now the sponsors aren't getting what they paid for. So it puts the company into a bind. I'm pretty sure from what his indication on social media has been is that it's been a pretty good exposure for him. He's been, I think, door bumper clear. Which, by the way, that's another hysterical. It's like the Tom Segura, Burt Hershier podcast of NASCAR in the nicest way possible. I'm not calling him fat, but you know what I mean.
And also too, I know we get go close to closing. Yep. It's also too, we've seen drivers like Denny Hamlin and Chris Buescher, to name a few, who have told Josh, "Hey, we're going to pay your fine." So there's definitely a community rallying around. Josh is also selling T-shirts as well on his website. So there's definitely a lot of support for Josh. And yeah, like you said, Tim, his sponsors probably gotten way more exposure just with this than they probably would, even if you won the race in Atlanta, just because of all.
I'm not going to say anything else here, but it reminds me of the three worded phrase that we all love and dear. Let's go, Brandon.
Yep.
It reminds me of that. It does. So this in closing, dude, I'm just gonna say this right now. NASCAR needs to get their head so far out their own ass, and I'll be the guy to say that, and and learn how to manage these guys. I understand they're all different personalities and they all have their own ways of doing things, However, what is fair is fair. Okay? What is good for thee or him is not good for some other person because they don't have the same popularity isn't fair. So, Denny Hamlin, okay, he opened up his big mouth because you asked him to, okay? Marketability, one of the marketable drivers in the industry, gets himself in trouble for opening up his big mouth. Josh Williams, basically in protest, for a simple mistake, by the way, I'll call it that. Josh Williams, that's a simple mistake. Crew guy knew it was cold, probably. Didn't have a lot of time. He didn't want to lose a lap because the pace car is coming up and they got to drop the jack and he's got to go. Wasn't sure if it was on there fully. Shit happens, man. Also, on top of that, this track is not exactly the same as it used to be. You're going faster. It's boring. You're going, it's not the same. And last but not least, the Hendrick Motorsports thing. I'm going to say this in the nicest way possible. This is not the first time Hendrick Motorsports has flirted with disaster. And not to do with the analogy of one of the oldest NASCAR songs of all time. But Hendrick Motorsports has a history of flirting with disaster all the time when it comes to the research and development and trying to find as much as they can and do these things with the race car. Now, do I give the benefit of the doubt because it's an OEM part? Okay, I'll give you that. But at the same point in time, you don't think Chad Knaus or Jeff Gordon had something to do? Not saying Jeff Gordon particularly, but you don't think those guys have a history of trying to find the best they can to get the most out of these cars so they can win races? Not saying anything William Byron can't do, but William Byron did not have a very good, successful year of 2022 of winning races. And now all of a sudden to win 2 in a row on the West Coast kind of says something. That's why I think also NASCAR kind of had to do what they had to do too, because the guy that won the race also was part of the cheating team. So that being said, guys, we're going to close it out with this. NASCAR, as a fan, needs to figure out what exactly it wants from their drivers and from their track officials and everything else in order to gain the best product they can to the fans. Until that is done, NASCAR is going to be one shell of itself, and that includes this year at the North Wilkesboro All-Star Race. I love that track dearly. It's an old school track. It makes nostalgia come back alive. But if they can't figure out what best product is going into for the sport, going into a TV rights deal that's soon to expire, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be watching this sport on an app. And it's not going to be on name brand television. So, that being said, appreciate as always, Chris, for joining me. We're going to have another great episode next week as well. It's going to be a barn burner, as we like to say, in the good old wrestling business. Appreciate it as always for joining me. Appreciate everyone listening. Feel free to like, subscribe, all that fun stuff on social media. Don't be a toxic table. And have a good rest of your week, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Yankee Cowboy Podcast. Feel free to follow us on social media via Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook.